Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott skill
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature. Today we are discussing a short story by, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, Nnedi Okorafor. And she has been making some waves lately because she's writing a Black Panther comic, but also she's a pretty
accomplished,
pretty accomplished author in her own right. And I've been wanting to read some of her stuff for a little while, so I suggested we read this short story called Spider the Artist. I am Steve Ramosi, your host, joined today by Scott Thurlow.
And I am not an artist.
And Chris Morgan.
What a tangle web we weave.
So I'm going to toss to Scott for the funny logline.
Sure, yeah. So I came up with "Do Androids Dream of Electric Guitars?" because it's always like a pretty solid reference to get to, and I think it fits pretty well. And we're about to say why.
Good one. Also, I just thought of this. Any spider can play guitar.
That's a good one. That should have gone with the Spiders from Mars reference as well.
Ah, damn it.
Oh well.
All these are coming out at the last minute.
Anyway.
All right. Anyway,
insert your own one there.
Let's start off with Scott. Discuss the plot for us.
All right. Sure. So. It's a woman who lives in Nigeria, I believe. You have the Niger Delta. And so it starts off like you sort of lulls you into thinking it's like contemporary, but shortly sort of revealed that they live in a somewhat dystopian sort of setting future where companies are building pipelines through people's houses in the villages. In order to prevent theft and maintain them, it seems as if they have invented and built robots, spider robots, if you will, that with their aggressive nature, they will murder people who are trying to. They say they bunker the pipeline.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of setting they live in, and the woman's in an abusive relationship. So in order, her one escape is to go out at night near the pipeline and play her guitar. And one night, a spider AI droid comes up, and she thinks it's about to murder her, but it seems as if it wants her to play. So that happens. She goes out more and more, and the same drone shows up, and eventually it makes its own sort of web of guitar, if you will, like creates its own guitar and plays with her, and that's sort of her one escape. And then later on, like towards the end of the story, one of the sections of pipelines is apparently broken and leaking out fuel, and everyone in town and all around is texting everybody and telling them to rush over there, free fuel, let's go get it right while it's hot. And a very large conglomeration of people show up, and then the spiders show up to destroy them all.
Yeah.
And she's the main character. Did they name her? I'm sorry. I don't know if she said her name in the story.
I actually don't remember that either.
I think her husband says it to her once. So
yes,
I'm sorry, I can't find it right now. But whatever her name may be, I'm sorry, it escapes me. But she survives, and her unborn child survives because the droid protected her in the ensuing chaos. And it's sort of left like a bittersweet kind of ending. Like it's open, like maybe it's hopeful, but also the droids might be coming for you next, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was all damn solid. This is a bit of a longer story, at least versus the ones we've been reading recently, previous to this episode. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. It was a good find, Steve-O. Like, good job. It's not really like one I probably would have found on my own, but I'm glad we did do it. I'm looking at a 3 for plot because I think it was very nicely self-contained. It, again, moves very nicely. It's paced quite well. It's neither slow nor is it rushed. I didn't feel. And yeah, just a lot of nice details spread throughout, which will speak more probably in like style and so forth. But plot-wise, I think it's very strong, and I'm looking at a strong 3.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm looking at 3 too. I probably am going to save most of it for style, because it's kind of hard to delineate at this point because there's so much artistry within the story itself and in the telling of the story itself. So I'm not really sure. So maybe I'll save some of this for style. I just going to say the first line of the story is "My husband used to beat me."
Yeah, it starts off rather forcefully, if you will.
So literally, it starts on a very jarring note.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it's just. I love the story. Really good find, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. I think I'm going to give this a 3. It's very strong throughout. The opening is actually kind of. Well, it's obviously disconcerting,
yes.
Like that first opening line.
It's unsettling, or like right off the bat.
Right. But it's also it kind of throws you in a situation where you don't really know what's going on, especially if you don't know anything about the story or like what it's about.
Yeah.
And I think that it does a great job getting you to the place where you are starting to figure things out.
Yeah,
and stuff
I would
like
say
that
sort of sprinkling in the details.
Without like making it super obvious. It kind of like holds your hand, but it doesn't. It like holds your hand and guides you through it, but it doesn't like just throw exposition in your face at any point or anything like that. It just lets the story develop on its own. And I really love that about this. It is strong from start to finish. I liked pretty much I don't think there was any part of this story where I was like felt like I was taken out of it or anything like that.
I agree.
And I thought that the ending was pretty poignant as well.
Yes.
So at the end, she's like kind of reminiscing about all the people that are dead, and like she was talking about becoming a teacher at some point in the story.
Yeah.
And then the big spoiler, the school gets destroyed.
The school was near where the pipeline was broken
in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Oh, so like the way that the spiders kill everybody is they just ignite all the fuel that's leaking out of the pipeline and kill everybody.
And
the
the
only
explosion.
reason she survives is because the spider that she had befriended and played guitar with and all this stuff throws up a force field around her.
And yeah, the spiders set a trap for her because the spiders come over while they're playing guitar, and one of them comes over and they have the red eyes and hits two of its arms and creates the spark.
Yeah, that's
like,
how they.
Yeah.
Like in other words, come on, time to go.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It reminded me of weird. Now that we bring it up, the ending with her being pregnant, because that was one of the points of contention whether her husband was abusive because she couldn't bear a child. And there's a movie.
I think it was strongly
Yeah,
stated.
but there is this movie from the 70s called Demon Seed. I think Michael Crichton wrote it, starred Julie Christie. But basically, an AI takes... No, this is back in the 70s. Of course, it's Crichton. Takes place over the house...
And Westworld.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, takes over the house, basically, and imprisons Julie Christie, and at the end, impregnates her. And creates this... But that was the question that left us, is like, is it her husband?
Actually, I didn't
How was this conceived? And, was the husband the one who couldn't conceive? I mean, was it because he was beating her? What thing? Or was the
Hold on. Are you suggesting that the AI is the father of
no,
this
what
child?
I'm saying that's one of
You
possible.
could take it maybe, but
what I'm saying,
I don't know.
what I'm saying is that it leaves that question.
Maybe
That was one of the things that crossed my mind when I'm reading this. And I don't know how it would happen. I'm just saying that given like
it's left open enough, maybe. Perhaps.
Certainly you could view it as the AI opened the door for that to happen. I don't think that it's trying to imply that the AI
Literally
had sex with her
yeah.
and
I'm not saying it even needed to have sex with her. It could have. This is an AI. There's nanotech. No, all I'm saying is she never really. I don't think, to my memory, that she specified. She just said my unborn child.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I'm pretty sure it was her husband's kid.
But
That's how I took it. But I suppose you can take it your way.
There's interesting implications, of course, with how the AI spider, I forget what she named it.
Spider the artist. Well, it has like a name
it's got a name. Man, I can't remember.
It's in her language. It stands for that. I'll find it in a sec. But you go on.
But yeah, like certainly there's the implication that opened the door to her being able to get pregnant, and because she was, I guess, because of she found a moment of happiness or something like that. There's implications there for sure. But
and her husband stopped being abusive, so it very well could have been. I mean, because she was getting happier, he was getting happier. Nobody knows, so it is very possible.
Well, actually, this is
Spider sex is always possible.
This is a perfect segue. So we're all giving this 3s.
Yeah.
This is a perfect segue to talk about themes. Chris, start us off.
This is a really good. This is this is one of those things where I might go ambiguous. Nebulous, something bigger, conceptual. Because when I was reading it and she was talking about the pipelines, I immediately thought of current events and got really pissed off. But there's a complexity to this story, and it's definitely, there's different relationships because there's the husband who doesn't know how to communicate and he's abusive. Because she doesn't know anything what's motivating him. She goes out there and she's communicating through music. with this AI that's been a threat and has been his nemesis to everybody. I mean, so thematically, there is this level of communication because obviously, the spider set a trap. They come by while basically the spider, and she are jamming, and they come by and snap so there's a level of communication here, that it's kind of hard because there's things that I can't grasp that I'm trying to put together. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start with like just forms of communication. Because even she's doesn't know why half this stuff's going on. She knows why she's playing guitar because it's her dad and so forth. And her husband, it's something that he allows her to do. She made mention that he never broke the guitar. Mm-hmm. So it's in a weird way, it's just about, in a weird fucked up way, it's about nonverbal communication. And I'm not championing one part of it. I'm just saying that there's just...
Have you stopped beating your wife yet, Chris?
Yeah.
Go on.
No, so that's where I'm starting from because there's bigger implications. Like if you want to take a look at like industry, how industry takes over and then of course the whole AI, how it's taken over. Like, is this, I'm not sure if it was our precast discussion or this, there are implications like, where is this going to happen? Oh yeah. Cause she says, the United States or whatever better hope these, don't learn to swim.
Well, I think she said better hope they don't learn how to build fins and come your way, which is pretty
building
good line.
fins. I mean, because they're already developing intelligence. So you do have the whole man versus technology thing. Man creates the machine of its own destruction. So there's those themes on it. There's kind of a lot going on in a very short story, and I've been giving this a lot of thought all day, and I've got these little pieces that I've been pulling. Anyway, it's enough. If it's enough for me to think about this on and off all day, I have to give it a 1.
There is, I agree with you. I think I'm going to give it a 1 as well. There's a very interesting discussion about AI and the possible outcomes of it, and I love that this story is ambiguous at the end. To a degree where it says, like, yes, AI is capable of killing my entire village, but also this one protected me, and, like, it and I are the two, like, they're basically the initial ambassadors to each other's, races, right? Like, she's, like, going to try and convince it not to kill all humans, and it will try to convince her not to, like...
Free music for all humans.
Destroy the village or whatever, like just
I mean, they learn the machinations because she's talking about how they steal oil and how they've learned to do it silently. And so obviously they learned even though the humans thought they were pulling one over on them, they were learning. But something else I meant to mention before with non-verbal communication that I noticed right away when she first described his eyes, her eyes, it was very, I don't want to say cold, but it was very literal. But when she described his blue eyes later, there's more of emotion attached to it. Like she called them like beautiful or,
undulating or azure.
Yeah. Azure,
like
and then when the red light, then she noticed the red light. So it's all, there's this expression that she puts to the AI. So it's, that's just maybe that would have gone into style. I don't know, but I was just thinking about like how she was telling the story about the communication, the nonverbal communication. That was something I noticed I want to bring up.
Yeah. I mean, like you guys are right. There's a number of them there, like the rape of the land by corporations, essentially.
Yeah.
And of course the sort of classic sci-fi, like, if we build AIs, can they learn to think and be more like emotionally like us, etc.? So all that's there, and I think it was explored well enough, but never answered. So I always like that is something to me that marks a good story like this, like sort of like, again, speculative sci-fi-ish fiction. So yeah, I think it was all well handled there, and it was sort of woven throughout. And yeah, the ambiguity of it all, again, that speaks to me. But I think when handled well, it's a better effect than outright saying like one way or another. Yes, I'm going to have to give themes a pretty strong 1 because there's enough there, and she inserted them rather nicely and spread them throughout, and leaves you, like you said, Chris, leaves you wondering, a lot to think about there. Yeah. So I think that's a mark of really good sci-fi.
It sounds like it's ones for all of us.
I think
themes.
So.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we could probably go on about the themes of this for a while, but
sure,
I'm going to cut it off here, and I'm going to talk about Antagonist, which is human greed, I guess. Like the entire problem is created, but You know what?
Humans are bastards.
It's interesting because the entire problem is created by the greed of whoever owns the pipeline trying to protect their interests. But that is the entire reason that she has a supporting almost protagonist on her side. So,
in a sense,
they're
sure.
like that human greed in and of itself is the is the catalyst for the entire story, and B, like her friendship that she strikes up with this AI creature, for lack of a better term. And I think that's really interesting that what I am viewing as the antagonist, and maybe you guys have a different idea of like what the antagonist is to some extent, but like it's not necessarily in this story like the worst. Like human greed isn't the worst thing because it creates something kind of beautiful, you know.
In a sense, fossil fuels, of course, are the antagonist. That's my jokey kind of answer. But like, to be fair, like again, it's grounded in reality and to an extent, like, and then run out, as a sort of thought experiment. So, like I said, it addresses that issue, and then of course, like the corporations protecting their interests via basically murder drones, more or less. So, like, this might be another one where I take a cue from my own book, and Chris mentioned like a more nebulous thing. I do like human greed as an antagonist as well. Like, yeah, it's sort of the impetus in a sense. It's sort of like a weird like cyclical loop because it produces one, which produces the other,
right,
etc. But I think again, certainly you can maybe point to like at least her name is M.A., I believe, E.M.E.
And Udide is the name of
the drone.
Yeah,
yes,
the spider.
So like M.A.'s husband, I think it was Andrew as well. Just having a glance
it is
at it.
Andrew.
Like, of course, he's just antagonistic to her, like in that sense.
That's true.
But he's not present as much.
I would say he's the biggest shit in this, though.
He's the biggest shithead. But the thing is, the village, the whole situation is because of these pipelines, because of the industry that has come in.
She's there because of that, like in a sense, like if she was like sort of forced into this situation. So yeah, like I don't know if I can point to one single thing, but I think certainly her and many other characters, the village itself felt antagonized by something.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
a mix of things, in fact, probably.
I think I have to give it a 1 because there was a good level of antagonism going on.
And tension, for sure, yeah.
Right, and but it's really interesting, the entire reason that Andrew's a fucking asshole is, well, maybe not the entire reason, maybe he's just an asshole, but like the entire reason that we're given that he's an asshole is because the pipeline is fucking his life up.
Yeah, sure.
And
so like I said,
theoretically, this is the reason that the whole village is like kind of being screwed because people are mining their entire country for resources and then not fucking giving them any of the money that they're making off of it, right?
Yeah.
So that leads to poverty. That leads to a lot of fucking bullshit. It's a really interesting question. It's almost like, but like none of the beauty of this story comes out if that pipeline doesn't exist, which is another way to look at it.
So it's bittersweet in that sense.
Well, I was going to say, aside from, because I'm not going to go on a rant about pipelines, but I'm just going to say
Thank you.
That's why it got me pissed off at the beginning. But what I'm going to say is, as I said before, sometimes an antagonist needs to, because there's so many levels of antagonization that sometimes if it's not, it can also be a catalyst.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. For
so,
sure.
I mean, if we're gonna look at the nexus of this whole thing, that this is the catalyst, whether or not, it's about corporate greed or whatever, this is the catalyst that breeds the antagonist, the levels of antagonism. I have to give it a very strong 1 because, as you both said, it's like without this stupid pipeline, without this thing, there would be no beauty that would come out of this, even though there's a lot of tragedy also obviously attached to it.
Sure, I mean, like, I'm definitely giving themes a 1 for everything, sort of like a combination of everything we just said. Because, like I said, what?
No,
Antagonist.
Yes, you're right. I'm also giving antagonist a 1, but they're sort of tied into themes, I would say, like some of them, and everything you just point out. You can point to like many of these factors, as you said, as catalysts that are antagonistic in the story and were effective. So, I would agree with a 1.
I don't have too much more to say about it. I think that antagonist is probably one of the more complex questions in this story, but for that reason alone, I love that they I love that Okorafor put so much into what the antagonist is in this story.
Yes.
And I'm gonna give it a strong one.
And
So-
also, a swarm of murder machines is also always going to be pretty effective.
Of course. Well, I guess maybe it's every other zombie
Or 10 well,
other than
1 out of 10, maybe not. I don't know.
But anyway, let's move on to Protagonist. Scott, you want to kick us off?
All right, yeah. So M.A., as I just happened to find her name, I think she was a really well done protagonist. I'm sorry, I keep mixing up. Yeah, she was. I mean, like you said, the first line is "My husband used to beat me," so like her story hits the ground running, like pretty intensely.
Yeah.
And she gets fleshed out. She explains, why she's in this situation, what's happening, and how she's trying to deal with it. And then I think she has a great arc. In fact, like you said, sort of becoming an ambassador to what is essentially meant to be built to be a murder machine, as I said. And they sort of form a relationship through music, which I think also can go back to themes a bit. But yeah, I thought she was a really excellent, interesting protagonist character, and I like following her story. So I'm probably giving it a strong 1 on that front. I think she's like I said, fleshed out quite well throughout. And as in the same way, like the world building is sort of parceled out, but very nicely. Like her bits of her like emotions and what she's going through, what she's thinking, and her plans are also like strung along through the story. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Protagonist. Giving it a pretty strong 1.
I'm giving it a 1. The thing I liked about her is this kind of first person is it's not centric. I mean, she's very generous with her description. She, in a way, gives people the benefit of the doubt. She's not. Her husband treats her like shit, but by the same token, she's. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe what she feels. She kind of puts herself basically in a corner in a way, but she's also, the way she describes things, very rich. It's not about her. So that's why I'm saying it's interesting that you don't get a lot of read except for the one A minor chord she strikes where she's like, my life is shit. That's about, but I mean, obviously all the details say that like her life is not happy, and that this is her one thing that does make her happy. Yeah. But I mean, that's the one statement she says. I mean, she doesn't wallow in anything. She's very descriptive. It's just for all that tragedy in here and for all that goes on, it's done very, she's a great protagonist. That's all I'm going to say. I can't. Really
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And it's interesting that you mentioned like how giving she is with her description. And like you can see in her own way, like despite the fact she's in an abusive relationship that she should probably, if she had the means, get out of, you can see that she still has some affection for her husband, right? Especially after he stops being a real fucking piece of shit. And like stops beating her and stuff like that. And like that is a really interesting statement on like, and this goes back to themes too, which is a theme that we didn't even mention, but like, just the way that people handle being in abusive relationships and things like that.
That's a good point.
It's something she has to deal with, and like she still goes and risks her life. She knows at the end of this story what's going to happen at the pipeline. She could just stay safe at her house and not go over there, but she goes over there, risks her life to try and save her husband, and like that says something about her character and like what her intentions are as a character, and I really love that. I'm going to give it a very strong 1.
She's surprisingly hopeful and and optimistic in her. Like she doesn't. It's like I'd sit there and I'd be like, yeah, go ahead, let the spider set a trap for you. Not necessarily a town, but she's very right side. It's an interesting read. I don't think we can actually, unless you read this.
Yeah, I will say at the same time. By the way, absolutely read this story before you listen to any more of this podcast. You should have read it before you started listening. But anyway.
Or if we have convinced you right now to go do it.
I will say that it also tells a story about somebody who is deep into an abusive relationship and is making excuses for somebody who is abusing them. And like,
to an extent,
that's another
that's
like,
classic.
That's another like darker look at what is going on in this. And I don't want to, gloss over that or anything. Like,
no, good point.
I think that's important to say that this is somebody who is stuck in something and trying to find the best out of it because she can't get out of it. Or she can't find a way to get out of it, or she can't bring herself to get out of it, or whatever it is. But, that says something about people that are in abusive relationships all over the world, and, that happens too. And
it's a real thing, and it's something that's addressed in there as well. Good point, you're right.
It sounds like we're all going to give Protagonist a 1.
I think so.
So let's move on to supporting character with Chris.
I don't remember what you said the name of the drone was.
Udidi, I believe.
Udidi?
It's in her native language.
UDIDA.
Yeah.
UDIDE.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm counting him as a supporting character, it as a supporting character.
Okay.
I'm definitely giving 1.
Subgendering the
yeah, man.
I'm giving,
spider,
To put your gender labels on the spider machines, man.
I'm giving the drone 1 because he or she, it is so integral to the story. In a lot of ways, it's a mirror. In a lot of ways, it's her guardian angel. It's her friend. It's kind of hard to put into words because I keep wanting to jump ahead. But I think it is important to the story. There would actually be nothing beyond the one cycle of abuse or whatever and misery without it. Her attitude towards it. I mean, at first when I'm reading it, I'm worried for her when it wants to play, and then it builds a stringed instrument out of a web. And if there's no, I mean, there's a lot of other supporting elements, but the drone is the biggest. I loved it. I'm giving it a 1.
Yeah, I mean, I probably agree. I was sort of debating it, but I think you're right. Like, the drone is an important secondary character, if not the most important, because of the relationship that forms between it and MA. So, yeah, I mean, it's characterized well enough. Certainly, it seems to have a personality of some sorts, and to some extent, like, wants and desires, and protecting her at the end, like, in fact, saves her life. So, yeah, I think it's pretty solid. They were called, I have it here. They're originally called Anansi droids, which, of course, is a reference to Spider Legend. So, yeah, like, they're there, it's funny enough, like, as an antagonistic force, as we said, but also this one specific one is a friendly, like, non-threatening one to the main character. And, yeah, Andrew, of course, like, he's not characterized that well, or at least to a great extent, but what you get of him, as you said, Steve-O, you sort of may understand why he's doing what he's doing, or at least you know what he's like. And I guess the village possibly itself, like, sort of collectively, like, some of the neighbors and stuff she mentions, and, like, how they all gathered together at the school at the end. But certainly I think the droid itself, Udidi, if that is indeed how you pronounce it, Spider the artist, if you will, is pretty well done, given that it's a fucking, basically, a drone AI machine. So I'm probably getting supporting a 1 overall.
Yeah, I completely agree about Udidi, and so her husband gets a fair amount of play in this, and he does have an arc-ish type thing where,
to an extent, like I said,
he goes through this when she is happy and, like, finding out of rediscovering her love of guitar and, like, going out and playing with
jamming with
Udide. He becomes happier and stops hitting her and, like, all this stuff. So he's got somewhat of an arc as well, and is an somewhat interesting character.
But then he turns again at the end, though, because he thinks she betrayed him in some sense somehow.
Of course, and, like, but that's part of the character arc, like,
yeah, you're right.
So I'll give him some credit as well, and just because he's a dickhead doesn't mean that the supporting character doesn't deserve 1. Yeah. But, like, also, like, I agree.
You don't
with
have
you
to like
guys.
The character.
Exactly. I agree with you guys that Udide the spider is the spider zombie
drone
motherfucker is really the star as far as supporting characters go.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give it a 1 for that. There are a couple other characters that are mentioned, but nobody really that comes into play too much in this story. So 1 for those 2 characters. And I'm going to continue on with dialogue. It's interesting. There is a little bit of dialogue, which is fine. Nothing amazing. But I am going to take the interactions between Ime and Udide as dialogue. Because
I was wondering if you're going to do that, and I guess
because I think that they do have a dialogue between the two of them, and like I think it's hard to deny that there is a dialogue that's going on between their.
I agree.
They're playing, you know, and not only they're playing, but like, you know, their interactions and things like that, the physicality of what's going on between them is a dialogue.
A dialogue, yeah.
And I think that part far outstrips the actual dialogue, like the actual human language that happens in this story. So for that, I'm going to give it a 1. I might have given it a 0 for, like, you know, actual dialogue, but
that was the thing going into this I wasn't sure about. But when we were talking about themes,
I was in the same boat.
When we were talking about themes, and I was, you know, hey, I pat myself on the back. Nonverbal communication. I was thinking about your review because I wasn't on it for Shape of Water, and how I was going to give when I was listening to our stuff. I always think what I'm going to give it, and I'm like, I was going to give dialogue. I was trying to decide, and then I can't remember who it was brought up the fact that this nonverbal communication.
I'll take credit for that. But
all right, I'll give you the credit.
Might not have been me.
But yeah, but myself as a musician,
yes.
I know that the communication, especially, you know, the call and response, and but the nonverbal, all the nonverbal stuff is dialogue.
Right.
It's so, I mean, it's going to be a very strong one because that to me is one. The story's got many strengths, many centers to it, and this is one of the things that holds the story together.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, it's funny because I was wavering on this one. Like, I wasn't sure. I had a question mark. But given what you guys both said, and definitely the nonverbal communication, which counts, so their interactions count unto themselves, even if there's not like words being exchanged per se. So yeah, I think that is going to elevate it for me to a solid 1. In terms of dialogue. Right. But I was somewhat unsure to go in with. But you guys made good arguments, so good on you.
Kind of taking shape what this is going to get. Yeah. But let's talk about style. Scotty, kicks off.
Yeah, it's very solid. Somewhat poetic, but not. It actually opens with a poem. Quotes a poem, and yeah, it's very nicely like put together. I guess the best way I can say it. I thought it kept itself up like throughout, and some of the phrases like we pointed out, like when she's describing Udidi's eyes, like the mechanical, like glowing, sort of almost like arc-like eyes. I guess if you want to call them that. But yeah, like I think she just has a knack for putting together really well done sentences that, and like I said, the biggest credit I would think is how she built the world up, how she started building up slight details here and there. So eventually you come to know and realize like what world you're like, you know, the sort of 20 minutes in the future world that she's living in,
right?
And how it's unfolding. So yeah, I think this is a pretty strong style. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm probably going to give it a 1.
The thing I also like, I just remembered when you were talking about that, was at the beginning, she was talking about when she was a kid, her father used to play and people's cell phones were going off. And this was written in 2008. So I'm like thinking, when she was a kid, she's probably in the 90s or 80s. I'm like, and then I realized, at that point, I realized this is the future because she's talking about zombies. And my first always thought is like, oh,
of course, it was a nice slow roll.
Another zombie story. Great. But it was interesting that originally she started off with her father playing this guitar and saying that especially
wood spoke to,
especially now, this was written in 2008, and especially now with the smartphones and everybody's distracted by them, to say that everybody was ignoring their phones and paying attention to that already establishes this instrument, music, and the power it has in this village. And with her, the story is beautifully written for like a very short story. I think it was less than 10 pages. She packs a lot in here. It's as Scott said, there's a certain element of poetry in her prose, and I think it's gorgeously written. I'm giving it a very strong 1.
I completely agree. You briefly mentioned it, Scott, but like the world building in this is top notch.
Yeah, pretty top notch, exactly.
Top notch. It's really good. You get a really good feeling for, like, especially for something that is completely alien to us sitting in this room, like
what it's like living in such a place,
living in like, you know, this little rundown, you know, building next to a pipeline. There's goddamn drone spiders running up and down the fucking pipeline every day. Like, you know, it's not something that we can really put ourselves in the place of, but because of how well this story
Exactly.
explains it,
Yeah.
we can kind of get there.
You can put
And
yourself in those
That
shoes.
is a
yeah.
mark of a really good and well-described world.
Well said.
And I think for that alone, it deserves a 1. On top of that, there is all of the like very poetic storytelling, the really good
Descriptions and so forth.
the really good callbacks to or the through line of like music and how important that is. You get this kind of musical feeling out of this story, which is great. And for all of those reasons, and probably several more that I'm just like not like mentioning right now, I'm going to give this a 1.
Yeah, style is very, very strong and coming in a strong 1.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Chris, last question. Do you recommend?
Yeah, I can't even bust chops about this.
Don't be coy.
I'm not going to be coy. No, it's a gorgeous story. Beth got really excited when she saw. She goes, "I just read a novella by this author, and I'm really excited to read her novella." I was like, "Oh, good, we've got this thing in our house."
There you go.
She's a phenomenal writer. She's writing some Black Panther now. I think you mentioned.
Some of the comic, yeah, I believe.
Yeah, I've in a very short time have become a big fan of hers. I highly recommend this story.
Yeah, I also recommend it. Like I said, good luck, Steve-O. It's not something I would have probably found, like as I mentioned, like on my own, but I'm glad we did, and I totally do. If you haven't read it, perhaps you will read it now, based on our recommendation, because it's just solidly done, and it's a really. I'd like to get to find more stories like this, like an authors like this, because like you said, Chris, I would like to check out more of her work based on this one, because I think it's damn strong, and I think we're probably about to give it a 10. I think it seems.
Sounds that way.
And deservedly,
it's really, really strong story.
I am interested to find more stuff like this. I know we're all fans of sci-fi, and like I kind of have a bent towards that when I pick stories for us.
But nevertheless.
But yeah, it's an incredible short story, and again, I try to look like when I pick stories, I try to look for something that's a little bit
somewhat outside our normal
different
comfort
than
zone.
what we would normally read, and like,
I think this was that for sure.
And like this kind of seemed to fall into that category, so I was happy to find it, and I was happy to read it, and I'm going to give it a 1. That being said, you guys know the question I ask every time. We all gave it 10s. Do we think it's a 10 story?
Maybe not like offer scale, but it's still up there. Like, again, if we're arbitrarily assigning a number, like off the mod scale, I might give it like an 8 or a 9 or something like that. Like very, very highly. But within our scale, yeah, it hits all the points that we look at, and I think does them quite well. So,
I'm I'm a very visceral guy, and I really have to say I would give it a 10 story. I mean, because even stuff we've given 10s before, we've discussed it. Like, how would you rate this movie? How would you rate this book? And but this one, I enjoyed it so much, and if I thought I missed a detail, I'd go back for it. I'd go back, look at the page, just to always keep this web of what was going on, because there are so many callbacks in very subtle ways. I never lost a beat. I would just always want to go back to be like, okay, how she describe that again? And I never lost, even when I'd stop, I never lost the fluidity of the story. I think it's a really well written story.
That's a good point. I think that if I was really trying, I could have had a couple nitpicks.
Yeah, exactly. But still.
Overall, this is very close to a 10. I'm not sure I would give it a 10, maybe like a 9.5 or something.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well.
But doesn't matter. We gave it 10s, so it's an aggregate score of a 10.
Goddamn, go check it out.
Or Sparta the Artist. Yeah, read it if you're at this point.
And we'll put the link up.
If you're at this point of our podcast and you haven't read it yet,
still go read it, because
don't be stupid.
Part of the experience is reading what she said. I mean, we told you the basics of the story. We've analyzed it
to get the full experience.
Read how she constructs this.
It's absolutely worth it. But
I agree.
I think that's going to do it for us. So thanks for joining us again. I have been your host, Steve Ramosi, here with Scott Thurlow.
And I will be befriending a spider droid myself very soon. Good night.
And Chris Morgan.
Have a good night.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Ramosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.